Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and today we're going to do the Week 10 wide receiver rankings. I will go through in tiers my top 41 wide receivers, but I do have some near 190 plus wide receivers ranked, so you can find all of my live updated rankings up at the website, www.theffforge.com. There's a link down in the description. You can also see the website up ahead of me a little ways there. If you would like to go check out all the rankings there, every position should be up by the end of this evening. So within maybe a few hours of this video getting posted, and then tomorrow morning, running backs videos will come out, and tight end video does not come out until Friday morning. So once again, you can see the rankings if you would like to check out the tight ends. I will also usually remember to, in the running backs video, just give a quick do I like the tight ends or not for this Thursday night game. Couple of quick announcements. Wide receivers are being ranked in this video as if Kyler Murray is playing and as if Justin Fields is starting as well. And over here to the left of the Stephon Diggs' name, you can see that colored little code there. That is the player temperature gauge. In case you're new to this, my videos, that is just a matchup gauge, essentially. Red is like it's a hot matchup. It's good. It's conducive for the player to perform towards the upper end of this expected range, or maybe have a ceiling type of game. And the deeper the red, the better that opportunity is in the week. And I did this season update it a little bit to include the PFF grades of the players, so that way there's a little bit more nuance to those, as can this player, given their skill set, overcome a bad matchup, or because it's a good matchup and they're, a really well rated wide receiver, it'll be red. But in the case of a really terrible matchup and a really good receiver, you would hope that would land somewhere along a whitish neutral color. So it goes from red, good, blue, bad, white, neutral. And let's quick recap how I did last week with my DFS Buys, which you can find my Week 10 DFS Buys at the end of this video, and how I did with my Love'ems and my Fade'ems. For my bottom of the barrel / big tournament long shot, I gave you Brandon Cooks at 4,400. That was a big fail. Thought he was turning a corner, was not to be. Now, who was I going to be taking a shot on last week? It was Nico Collins at $5,800. Like the price for him, he ended up as the wide receiver 11, so I think that worked out pretty well. And for my contrarian play, I said Puka at 7,400 would not get a lot of action. He probably did not, but you were correct not to bet on him. If you did not, that did not work out. For my Love'ems, I gave you Chris Olave, Gabe Davis, and Brandon Cooks yet again. And so Chris Olave did have the type of week. I think I ranked him as my wide receiver 10, right around there. He ended up as the wide receiver 10. And then, of course, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks were both, obvious failures of decisions there. For my Fade'em, I gave you DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman Jr., and Marquise Brown. DK Metcalf, Marquise Brown finished as wide receiver 45, 54 on the week. Michael Pittman Jr. had 10 fantasy points on the week. It did finish all right. It wasn't an impressive wide receiver week overall. Once you got past the top few, things degraded quickly. So all in all, I think I did more good than bad with my wide receivers in week 9. Let's try and bat 100 this week. Moving on to the week 10 rankings. All right, welcome back in. So these are my top 9 wide receivers. This is my first tier, my must-start guys. I really don't think that I need to explain why you should be starting these guys. Pretty much no matter what the scenario. Stephon Diggs is my wide receiver 1 this week, followed by Amon-Ra St. Brown, Keenan Allen, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Adam Thielen, Michael Pittman Jr., Mike Evans, and at wide receiver 9, we have Brandon Cook to wrap up that tier. Nothing really to say there. Let's move on to my second tier of wide receivers. And originally I wasn't really going to talk about this tier much because we're pretty much in must-start territory. However, this ended up being a tier where I had a lot of guys that I loved, as you can see, and I had a couple of guys that I wanted to fade in this tier as well. But the two that I'm really different than compared to the ECR right now are going to be Nico Collins and Chris Olave. And at my wide receiver 10 and 11, they're up at the top of this list. Let me get this So for Nico Collins, Vegas is not necessarily buying into Houston's offense being able to hang with Cincinnati. Cincinnati is an average opponent in terms of the average fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. And throughout this video, unless I state otherwise, if I say the matchup is good or bad, or it's the fourth best, fourth worst, I'm essentially referencing the average fantasy points allowed on an average weekly basis for that defense. The thing here is that I kind of do believe that this could be a shootout between Cincinnati and Houston. I'm believing in it, and of course Nico Collins should be a part of that once again. So I like Nico this week a fair bit, and I'm willing to ride him with a good amount of confidence. Then at wide receiver 11 with Chris Olave, his ECR is really high again. I think he was ranked 6th coming into this week for the ECR. I just can't quite do that for a guy who's been a barely borderline wide receiver 2 for the entirety of the season up until this point. Minnesota is the 9th best wide receiver matchup for wide receivers, of course. And so I like Chris Olave this week. I just can't rank him that high. I've got other guys that I have a little bit more confidence in and like the ceilings for more. Then at wide receiver 12, we have DeAndre Hopkins. Tampa Bay is a bottom 5 defense in completions allowed to anybody, to every position. They're bottom 6 in average yards per completion, and they allow the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. So they allow a lot of completions, top 5 most completions allowed, and they allow a lot of average yards per completion, the 6th most in the league. And then when what that turns out to be in fantasy is that they're the second best matchup for wide receivers. Levis targeted Hopkins 11 times in the last game, last week, and through his first 2 starts, averaging 8.5 targets to DeAndre Hopkins in a good matchup here that fits DeAndre Hopkins' profile. So I really think that he's a good bet to have a good game this week. At wide receiver 14, we have Garrett Wilson. And Las Vegas, the opponent there allows the 7th least fantasy points per game to wide receivers. You always think Las Vegas, oh, that's a good matchup. It just feels like it should be a good matchup, but it really has not been. And, of course, you have Zach Wilson throwing the ball to him, and we all have seen how that can result. Garrett Wilson's been a good wide receiver this season. That's why he's still ranked 14th for me. But this week, I am going to fade it. It's not a week where I'm expecting a good game from Garrett Wilson. Another 9-point half PPR type of game is really what I'm thinking. No touchdown is the most likely scenario. Then at wide receiver 15, have Terry McLaurin. Nothing to add there. And at wide receiver 16, have DK Metcalf. And all season long, I had done it a little bit less because it felt like a cheat code, but you've found success by targeting the players who are going up against Washington, most notably the deep threats on teams when they're facing Washington. As far as Love'ems, that's been a good strategy and it's worked out very well. So I love DK Metcalf going up against Washington. Seattle is the 4th highest Las Vegas betting implied point total this week on top of that. So that's just a little ice cream on top of the cake there. That's the saying. Now on to wide receiver 17. We have DJ Moore going up against Carolina. Carolina, on average, allows the 6th least fantasy points to the wide receiver position. The thing is their defense faces a low volume passing attack because team runs against them, because they can't run against them, because the offense doesn't put a lot of points up, and because their run defense isn't very good. Silver lining here for DJ Moore, aside from that obvious part of if this game were to be back and forth, we would expect Chicago to have to pass a little bit more. But also, even if it is a low-volume pass attack, we know that DJ Moore can make his day on one single catch and at least put up a fine stat line for you just off of that one catch. The death knell for me this week, and part of why I do have a fade him here ultimately on DJ Moore, is that the thumb for Justin Fields. We don't really know where that's at. Accuracy is already not something that you say, oh, Justin Fields is so accurate. Such an accurate guy. He is pretty accurate with the deep balls, but regardless, all the more reason concern about that thumb and being able to take advantage of this Carolina defense and a limited amount of opportunities there. So for me, I think I'm going to break this down into the 2 extremes here. Full PPR, I would actually actively avoid DJ Moore if possible if you have a high reception kind of option to go over him. Just a safe floor kind of guy. As far as standard formats, I think that he is a fine play because you're just hoping for that one big touchdown kind of play, very possible, or even just a touchdown, very possible against this Carolina team. I think Chicago should be able to move the ball, even if Justin Fields is not quite himself, for whatever that's worth. Half PPR, I think you're probably stuck playing him, but, you could always, if you want to pull a big brain, big gut move and sit him for someone, I wouldn't necessarily argue against it. Deontay Johnson in at my wide receiver 18, and to wrap this tier up, we have Christian Kirk in at wide receiver 19. He does get a love him from me. San Francisco is a death by 1,000 paper cuts type of defense. They allow the 5th most fantasy points on average to the wide receiver position in half PPR, and 4th most in full PPR. See where I'm getting here? 1,000 cuts. They're even a better matchup in full PPR. They allow the 3rd least yards per completion, but they allow the 3rd most completions amongst all teams in the NFL. Kirk is the lower ADOT guy at 8.3 average yards per depth of target versus Calvin Ridley, who is a 12.9 average depth of target guy. So I think that Christian Kirk, I wanted to choose one or the other, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, and so I looked at, the stats that I just told you, and I think that Christian Kirk matches what works best against the San Francisco defense. 12 targets, 8 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown, I think, is very possible. Let's go 96 yards. I think is very possible. Obviously, that wouldn't be the over-under of 96 yards, but you get the idea. I like Christian Kirk this week. In fact, I love him. And that's going to bring us on to my 3rd tier. This is, we're still in good start territory for me. Outside of, I think, the top guy in this tier, Davante Adams, going up against the New York Jets. It's the single worst matchup for wide receivers. I think this is too high of a ranking for him. To be frank, I don't really feel comfortable with it. Let me know in the comments, please. What do you think? Should I have Davante Adams down at the bottom of this tier as my wide receiver 25? I just don't feel comfortable with him at all this week. I'm fading Davante, and sit him if you wish. I'm not going to argue against it at all. Wide receiver 21, we have Deebo Samuel. Wide receiver 22, Tank Dell. Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, and Marquise Brown are the wide receivers of this tier, and I don't think I really need to talk about these guys. Like, they're in fine matchups. They're in good situations. If they're the next guy up, feel free to start them with confidence. I still like them all, including Marquise Brown, of course, assuming Kyler Murray is at quarterback. And for Marquise Brown, all right, so I've exposed my 4th tier because I do want to quick mention on Marquise Brown that he's in a plus matchup, and I would start him over Amari Cooper. This is an ECR thing. I just noticed that they were flipped compared to the ECR. So why would I start Marquise Brown over Amari Cooper? Well, the matchup for one, also Amari Cooper's facing Baltimore, not a plus matchup at all. They're the 5th worst wide receiver matchup. And a fair bit of Amari Cooper's production this season has been due to a little bit of good luck. And I don't really want to bank on that good luck in this tough matchup against Baltimore. If possible, I would like to sit Amari Cooper, but he does have his quarterback back, so that helps. Wide receiver 27, we have Calvin Ridley, and I'm just going to, I call this tier my cautiously optimistic tier, starting with, of course, Amari Cooper, wide receivers 26 through 32 here. I'm just going to run through them and say why I am cautiously optimistic about them. So wide receiver 27, we have Calvin Ridley, good wide receiver matchup for him. Wide receiver 28, Cortland Sutton. He's been a low-end wide receiver 2 all season long, so I'm just banking on that continuing. Wide receiver 29, we have Jordan Addison. And the quarterback, Josh Dobbs, has had some time now to get acquainted to the team, learn his team's names even. And, of course, the talent level of Jordan Addison appears to be there so far. He was able to step up in the absence of Justin Jefferson, so that gave me a lot of confidence in a guy who I wasn't sure about entering the NFL season. And, of course, if Justin Jefferson returns, I think that probably helps Jordan Addison's floor in what is a tougher matchup against New Orleans. Not a great matchup. I'm cautiously optimistic about Jordan Addison, hoping Josh Dobbs can get the ball out to him. Concerned, though, cautiously concerned as well. Then at wide receiver 30, we have Jahan Dotson. He's in a plus matchup, and he has been coming on for the past 3 weeks, so look for that to quite possibly continue against Seattle. Wide receiver 31, we have Gabe Davis, and Denver allows a high average yards per completion, and Gabe is Gabe. He's a guy who can take advantage of that flaw in the Denver defense. And then at wide receiver 32, we have Drake London, and it's a good matchup for him going up against Arizona. It's the 11th highest implied point total for the Atlanta Falcons this week. That's not too shabby, so he could definitely take advantage of that. Don't love him, but cautiously optimistic about him. Let's move on to my final tier here, starting at wide receiver 33 with George Pickens. And we're going to do this in a similar way, but this tier I've titled my From Concern to Hope. And it starts off in an area of concern for guys, and then we get into some guys who I'm hopeful about. But, they're ranked the other way due to essentially production so far on the season. So, at wide receiver 33, we have George Pickens, and Green Bay has been a very tough wide receiver matchup, so I am concerned about him this week. Then we do get a random hopeful in here with Romeo Doubs at my wide receiver 34, and this is a bonus love him this week. I usually do 3 for the wide receivers in each category, but I chose 3 guys who were near must starts, and I pride myself on taking risks and not just giving you the names that are clearly you're going to start this guy, you're going to sit this guy. I like to some extent at least, take a little risk with it and let you know some of the guys who I'm concerned about or I like a lot for different reasons. And in this case, with Christian Watson, I assume, I do not have Christian Watson ranked right now. I assume he's going to be out, believe he has a concussion. So that alone, aside from other injuries that he sustained, I figure he'll be out. And in that event, we've been targeting the opponents of the deep threat option against Washington, as I spoke about a little bit before, because Washington absolutely stinks against the deep pass. Well, guess what defense? Just look at who Green Bay is playing up against, Pittsburgh. Guess what defense, take a guess, allows more deep targets, allows a larger average yards per completion than the Washington Commanders, who are now ranked second in that category. Of course, it is Pittsburgh. And so Romeo Doubs is, especially with Christian Watson out, the deep target guy on this offense. I think it could work out well for Doubs. Not a high volume, more of a half PPR standard play than a full PPR play, I would say. Then wide receiver 35, we have Zay Flowers. No ceiling plus second worst matchup for him is the concern. The concern for Jacoby Myers at wide receiver 36 is it's the worst wide receiver matchup plus Aiden O'Connell. And now we're going to get into an area of hope here with Michael Thomas. It's a plus wide receiver matchup, hoping for him to rebound and give you that nice floor that he's been able to provide season long. Then at wide receiver 38, we have Jerry Jeudy, who it's more hope than concern, but he's kind of an in-betweener there. A little bit of hope, a little bit of concern because it is Jerry Jeudy. But it's not a bad matchup going up against the Buffalo Bills. And this is a game that could have a lot of points, and you suspect that Denver will be in a negative game script for the entirety of the game, force them to pass a little bit more than they might want to. Then at wide receiver 39, we have Demario Douglas. Of course, we are hopeful for Demario Douglas to fulfill anybody who has picked him up off of the waiver wires and needs him. And it's a solid matchup going up against Indianapolis. Rashid Shaheed at wide receiver 40 plus wide receiver matchup for a boomer bust guy. You know, he is your Gabe Davis Jr. type of guy, and it's a decent matchup for that to work out. Then Jackson Smith and Jigba will wrap up this tier, wrap up my rankings for this video at wide receiver 41. It is a top 3 wide receiver matchup going up against Washington. Don't know that, Jackson Smith and Jigba specifically matches what we target against Washington, but he's been fantasy relevant for the past 3 weeks, whether all that's been deserved or not. So look for it to quite potentially continue here against Washington. Not a tough matchup. And I did not rank Josh Downs, Curtis Samuel, Christian Watson, or Justin Jefferson. So far, those players are not being ranked. Let's move on to my DFS buys. Get this video over with for you so you can move on with your day. At the bottom of the barrel, such a big tournament long shot, I have a Michael Wilson at 3,500 DK bucks. For some reason, with Kyler Murray, his projections really stood out. So I like Michael Wilson, if for no other reason than the fact that my projections are saying, hey, this combination could work real nicely, especially this week. I guess. I don't know that's some great matchup against Atlanta. And then, who am I taking a shot on? I'll pay up for Amon-Ra St. Brown versus the Chargers at 8,300. That's what I get for just reading. I know what I'm saying here. Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Chargers, 8,300 bucks works out. And contrarian play, I'm going to pay up for Keenan Allen as well. I usually don't give you pay-up options too much here, but I think that he'll probably be overlooked by many, with Diggs just being a couple of $100 more than him, and then Jamar Chase is just a couple of bucks, a couple $100 cheaper than him. He kind of falls in the middle of two options where I think people would say, if I'm paying up, I want the top guy, or, hey, look at that, I get a little bit of a discount with Jamar Chase. He's less than Keenan Allen. Of course, I'll pay for him. People love Chase. So that's where I think Keenan Allen will end up not getting put on a whole lot of rosters if you want to differentiate your lineup. Thank you very, very much for tuning on in. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you made it to the end. As always, appreciate it. Peace out.